Well, so Tata Motors has finally launched their new compact SUV, the Nexon, and it does look very stylish on the outside. But the big question that everyone is asking right now is this car a better investment than the current king of the compact SUV space, the Maruti Suzuki Vitara Brezza? We'll compare both these cars today for you, and we'll talk about the interiors, their driving bits, and find out which one makes better sense. So stay tuned for the next 10 minutes. Well, so in isolation, the seats on the Vitara Brezza are pretty good in terms of comfort. The support for the lower back is very good, and the support for your under thighs also is very good. You also get these side bolsters over here, which means that if you enjoy pushing this car into corners, these seats should keep you in your place. But when compared to the Nexon is slightly ahead because the cushioning on the Tata Nexon is definitely slightly better than the ones inside the Vitara Brezza. So in terms of seat comfort, it is neck and neck, but yes, I think that the Nexon wins it by a very slight margin. Well, in terms of features, both these cars are pretty well kitted out. You get this huge touchscreen both in the Nexon as well as the Vitara Brezza. The one on the Vitara Brezza though is a little easier to operate and also is a lot more intuitive than the one on the Nexon. In terms of legibility, both of them are more or less the same. So if you have a very strong day of sunlight on the outside, both the screens are more or less decent. They're not the best in the business, but they're quite okay to operate. Well, so credit where credit is due. The Nexon seats are definitely better than the Maruti Suzuki Vitara in terms of overall comfort. Cushioning is better, the support for the lower back is also better, and the seat scope also offers you better cushioning. So on those long highway trips or on those long traffic trips in the city, these seats will keep you more comfortable and will offer you a more relaxing experience. Well, in terms of quality, the quality on the Nexon is pretty good and it is at par with the Vitara Brezza. There are of course some patchy issues inside the car, like this box cover for the center console over here. It doesn't really have that same tactile feel like some other parts of the console, and the switches for the AC controls, well, they're not as tactile or as soft to operate as the ones on the Vitara Brezza. So overall, even though the quality is at par with the Brezza, there is some room for improvement. Well, in terms of practicality, both these cars are neck and neck. You get this huge glove box over here. You also get a covered tray over here, and it is a very deep box where you can keep a lot of Diet Coke cans in. Door bins are large enough to house those big 1 liter bottles, and the door bins also have place to keep a small umbrella in them. So yes, in terms of utility places, the cars are evenly matched, but because of that umbrella thing, this car has a slight advantage over the Vitara Brezza. Well, in terms of rear seat comfort and space, as you can see, I have plenty of headroom even for my height, which for reference is 5'10". So these seats should be comfortable for people who are around 6. And knee room also is pretty good. There is a lot of place below the front seats where I can stretch my feet below them. So Tata Motors has carved out plenty of place for occupants over here. The only issue is that it doesn't feel like a very wide car at the back. So you can actually have 2 occupants in comfort. The third one can fit in, but it will be a bit of a squeeze. And also, the lump in the floor panel is pretty prominent, so whoever sitting here will have to really jostle for legroom with his other occupants. That said, the seat comfort is very good, the cushioning is absolutely spot on, and the backrest angle really is very good as well. Well, that big and boxy shape on the outside means that I have loads of space over here on the inside, especially headroom, which is massive, and knee room also is pretty generous and is at par with the Tata Nexon. Well, one big advantage that the Maruti Suzuki Vitara Brezza has over the Nexon is the fact that you get these small quarter glass windows at the back, which means that unlike the Nexon, which only has that big chunky pillar and feels very dark on the inside, this one has a very roomy and a very airy feel to the cabin, and on long journeys it's a fact that you will appreciate. Also, the waistline over here isn't rising up like the one on the Nexon, which means that you don't feel hemmed in, and you feel like you are sitting in a much more roomier and a much more airier place than you really are. So that's a big advantage that the Vitara Brezza has over the Nexon. Well, in terms of seat comfort, the seats on the Vitara Brezza are pretty good. The backrest angle is spot on. Support for your lower back is good. There is decent cushioning for your under thighs as well. If you are someone who prefers to be sitting in the back seat over those long journeys and are someone who prefers to be chauffeur driven in, you will definitely enjoy the back seat of the Vitara Brezza much more than the ones on the Nexon. Well, so overall in terms of boot capacity, the Vitara Brezza's boot is really nice and boxy. It's a well-shaped boot. There's minimal intrusion into it from the loading sill, which means that heaving in those big bags should not be an issue at all. And it's about 328 liters, which is quite okay. But when compared to the Nexon, which is about 350, it is slightly behind. So otherwise, in isolation, this is pretty good, but yes, the Nexon on paper has a slight advantage. Now, in terms of outright power delivery, the Vitara Brezza is slightly behind the Nexon. This one makes about 89 bhp of power to the 110 bhp that the Nexon makes. But in real world conditions, it is the Vitara Brezza which feels a lot more sprightly and a lot more lively to drive, and that's because this is a lot lighter in its curb weight. Yes, this car is about 100 kilos lighter than the Nexon is, so it feels a lot more like an athlete on its feet, unlike the Nexon, which feels like a very muscular and a very bulbous wrestler. Well, the Vitara Brezza's gearbox is a lot more sporty and a lot more accurate and a lot more lighter to use than the one on the Nexon, which simply has a very heavy gate and needs a heavy hand to shift. Well, but that said, if you are someone who primarily drives this car in the city, then you will really enjoy the Vitara Brezza. And why is that? Well, simply because the steering wheel on this car is a lot lighter than the one on the Nexon. It still offers you decent feedback and good feel, but it's a lot more lighter, which means that maneuvering this car in the tight city places and tight city spaces will be a lot easier. Also, this car seems to have better visibility than the Nexon. The A-pillar is quite thick, but it's not as chunky as the one inside the Nexon, and visibility from the back also is pretty good. So this car feels better for the city. The clutch also on this car is a lot more lighter. Remember, the Vitara Brezza only comes with a diesel engine. There's no petrol on sale, but the diesel engined clutch on the Vitara Brezza is a lot lighter, and that combined with the light gearbox as well as light steering means that this is a much better and a much more easier car to drive in the city. Well, so if you consider yourself a keener driver, which car should you go for? Well, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that it is the Maruti Suzuki Vitara Brezza which has the edge for keener drivers. And why is that? Well, simply because the chassis on this car feels a lot more dynamic, it feels a lot more sporty, and this car will change directions a lot more easily than the Nexon will. There is a little bit of body roll on this car, but it's always under control. And unlike the Nexon, which has a very, very dull steering wheel, this one offers you a very feelsome and a very communicative steering wheel. And it's a steering wheel which will really reward the keener driver. There's loads of feedback and loads of feel in the steering wheel. And why is this car better for keener drivers? Well, simply because the chassis on this car is a lot more dynamic to drive. It feels a lot more sharper. And this is a car which will change directions a lot more easily than the Nexon. Also, the steering wheel on the Vitara Brezza feels a lot more feelsome and offers you better communication than the one on the Nexon, which feels very dull and really does offer you very little feedback. And along with all that, you also get a very nice and light clutch along with a very crisp gearbox. It's a very sporty and a very crisp gearbox, and it's a gearbox which you will simply enjoy just for the heck of it. So overall, for anyone who calls himself a keen driver and calls himself a sporty driver, and if you enjoy driving and drive for the thrill of driving, then it is the Maruti Suzuki Vitara Brezza Diesel which has the advantage over the Tata Nexon Diesel. And if you don't agree with me, you can of course write your comments in the comment section below. Well, in terms of refinement levels, this engine is definitely a lot more refined than the Maruti Suzuki Brezza's engine. And even though there is a little bit of diesel clatter when you start off from cold, once things warm up nicely after a couple of kilometers or after a couple of minutes, this engine becomes very quiet. And of course, when you're on the highway, refinement levels are even better because the engine is spinning at a lowish 1800, 1700 RPM when you're doing speeds of say about 90 or 100 kph, because it has a sixth gear, which means that flexibility is improved quite a lot over the Brezza. And the engine really does feel like a very distant hum. It feels like a murmur, and the cabin is nicely isolated. Well, one more area where this car has the clear advantage over the Vitara Brezza is in its high-speed stability. Now, the Brezza isn't bad in isolation, but this one is slightly better. It feels a little more stable on the highway, and it also has a lot more reassuring ride than the Vitara Brezza when you're of course doing speeds in excess of 100 kph. Well, the only thing is that the Nexon steering wheel isn't as crisp or precise as the steering wheel on the Maruti Suzuki Vitara Brezza, and sometimes it also does tend to feel a little vague when you compare to that car. So if you're a keen driver and if you are someone who does enjoy pushing his car into corners, then you will definitely like the Vitara Brezza because it has crisper handling and it definitely feels the more keen car to drive. Well, so the clutch, the gearbox and the steering wheel on this car, the Nexon that is, are much more heavier to operate than the one on the Brezza. And you also get this huge chunky A-pillar over here, which means that visibility around it is a bit of an issue. You have to just move your neck around to see what's coming through around the bend when you're, of course, taking those corners. So overall, if you're driving in the city primarily, then the Vitara Brezza is definitely the nicer and the easier car to drive. This one isn't as responsive below 2000 RPM, but once you get past that 2000 RPM mark, all the way up to 4500 RPM, there's plenty of torque available in the mid-range, and overtaking on the highway really is a very easy affair. All you need to do is simply shift one gear down and overtake that slow-moving truck. So overall, what I'm trying to say is that if you drive only in the city, or if you drive primarily in the city, if you drive 90 to 95% in the city only and only take your car out 5 or 10% on the highway, then the Vitara Brezza is definitely a better car because it has lighter controls and it also has better visibility, not only from the front pillar but also at the back. It has much better visibility. But if you take your car very often on the highway, then the Nexon is a better car because it has a much better ride at higher speeds, and it also has a much more punchier diesel engine, and it has better torque as well in the mid-range. So yes, it's really between choosing city driving and highway driving, and in the city there's no beating the Vitara Brezza's light controls as well as its pliant ride, whereas this car feels much better on the highway. So even though the Tata Nexon comes across as a very strong package, the Maruti Suzuki Vitara Brezza isn't a pushover. And this car scores high points when it comes to city driving, as well as offering you a roomy cabin, good fuel efficiency, and it also does come with Maruti's tried and tested after-sales and service network. Now, even though it might be a little more expensive on paper, but to remember, Maruti prices and resale values are very strong when it comes to selling your car after 5 or 6 years. That said, if you are someone who drives a lot on the highway and wants something which looks really different and outstanding from whatever else is available in the market, then the Nexon is the choice to go for. It's also a lot more cost competitive than the Maruti Vitara Brezza, which makes it a good deal. And as I just said, you simply cannot go wrong with either one of these two cars.